I was thinking as I was preparing for this, one of the things we're going to talk about is adoption and user adoption today and the barriers of it. So I've got my digital and my analog notes here, both, just in case one doesn't work. Redundancies, yeah. So roadmap to efficiency. Explore how leveraging the power of technology and the human touch can help us build a more efficient and authentic customer journey. And I'm big into words, so when I think about, obviously we know efficient, we're thinking of something that is instantaneous and fast. Authentic, I think that's a real challenge when you look at automation because there's so many different situations that come up. So if you're going to communicate and you want it to be authentic, how can you automate that really, So when I look at the two of those together, I think of effective. And how can we be effective in the use of technology in our space? So, with that in mind, I'd like to start off. So, Josh, as an industry, we continue to struggle with getting a more efficient, effective, and authentic process using technology. Of course, we think about, all the other consumer transactions that seem to be so easy. What do we have to do to improve the mortgage process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking about that. And I can really think about what the challenges are. And I think there's two main challenges. Number one, I'll just call it regulation and secondary market, right? What are the laws going to say? And sometimes there's lots of regulation in mortgage lending, which is why I like supporting the CMBA. They're a great advocate for lenders and for consumers, making sure we make the mortgage process easier. So there's that component that's always been part of the process when it comes to getting a mortgage. And we have to make sure that gets easier. The second part is legacy platforms, right? So this year will be my 24th year in the mortgage industry, and I can tell you it's the same technology it was when I came in here 24 years ago, and things haven't changed. So what you have is all these disparate systems, and 24 years ago, 30 years ago, they didn't make things that worked and that were interchangeable like Legos. Right nowadays, technology is more like Legos. They all work together if it's built today. So there's a lot of these disparate systems, so what happens is it's really hard for consumers to get that great experience with you as a lender if all your information's not being transparent, it's not flowing across all the systems, not interacting appropriately or intelligently. Right? Like one of the things that we are, yes, we're a CRM and market automation platform, but more so than ever than what we realize for our customers, we are a data movement company. We manage and move their data intelligently through different platforms. Like, how do you think about this? I'm a lender or I'm a consumer getting a loan from you, and I want to try to craft a great experience, but my CRM or my LOS doesn't communicate to the phone system, doesn't communicate to POS. You don't know if someone's just applied. You don't know if they just responded to you. So how do you have an authentic communication to someone and say, I'm here to help you, when you really don't know what's taking place? So I think that's really what it comes down to, is getting newer technology and getting stuff that works together more seamlessly.
Yeah. Any other comments on that? Because I think when I think about, like an example, when I applied for a mortgage and my loan officer essentially said, ignore the automated messages because it's not in sync with what the underwriters are doing. That's right. Yep. Other folks, you have any comments on this?
Yeah, real quick.
Matt?
A little bit earlier, I was listening in on another presentation about chat and chat bots and all of those things. And so I think when you look at those huge efficiency gains potentially, but when you look at the end customer, they're very different. Some customers are first-time home buyers, others have done it a bunch of times. Some want to talk to a person, others don't. And so you just need to really understand how you want to communicate with the potential borrower and understand that so that you do have that human touch. And the technology is great, and if we can get it all to work together, it's even better. But unless you really understand who the true customer is and how they want to interact with you, I think you're probably going to spend a lot of time and effort on shiny new things and maybe not get to the results that you think.
Before we get to the next question, then I think it sounds like some sort of ability to discern the situation Do you see that, Jeremy or Kenon, do you see that type of intelligence being built into systems?
I think what Josh said was really key, which is you want to try to make the most customized experience, to Matt's point, possible, but you're doing it in legacy technology that hasn't been built to do that and hasn't been built to do it together. So, Chuck, it's 100% the goal, no question. You can only really deliver it by doing it in this instance and then over here in this instance, and those haven't been connected or you haven't been able to do it holistically. And that inability to deliver an experience holistically because of how the legacy systems do or don't talk, and when you have the money or the opportunity to address them in your kind of refresh or updating modernization budget or timeline, ends up being kind of undercuts the value of even doing it in one area overall.
So when you do have a project, and you get excited about it, and you feel like you've got something that is really going to make a difference, what we hear is the challenge of getting users to adopt, and the change management is really what undermines the effectiveness of it in many cases. Now, Matt, I know you've consulted with a lot of different organizations. You want to talk a little bit about getting users to adopt and what's involved in that?
Sure, and I'm going to start a little bit higher than that and talk about a couple of concepts that are fairly straightforward but often missed. Number one, any of these big transformation efforts are business projects. They're not tech projects, they're business projects. And the goals within them are to achieve business results. And so you can't forget that. And second to that, you need to ensure that you're working with the key stakeholders, the customers from the very beginning, so that you understand exactly what you're trying to achieve. And I've seen projects like this at very small lenders and servicers and huge ones. And the ones that are always successful have somebody at the top that's running it, that's the visionary, that has the energy and that can drive it forward without any fear of maybe stepping out of a comfortable job in order to go about this. Sometimes the person is high up enough where they have the ability and the clout to drive it. Other times they have to be the one that works with the top of the house to gain advocacy. Those are some key things, but in terms of change management, it's making sure from the very beginning that you're engaging with all of the people that I mentioned, the stakeholders, the external customers, everyone, and continuing to tell them along the way what it's going to be like at the end, but also to give them things along the way to show it and to involve them. Communications are key. We found that very, very positive results from organizational effectiveness workshops and getting people really enthusiastic about it, because they never really go as planned. There's always bumps in the road, but the more you can do using change management principles to keep people calm, keep the momentum moving forward, keep the excitement high, when you do have a couple of little bumps in the road, everybody's got skin in the game. Yeah. And so, again, it does involve this personal touch, really, in the complex tech changes.
Yeah, you're talking about the perception too. I've heard that everyone hates change, but yet I think if I gave every one of my employees a raise, they wouldn't complain at all. No. Right? It's the perception of the change and the fear that goes along with that. You mentioned the word visionary, and so that made me think of this gentleman sitting right to the left of me, Kenon. So you run an organization that has truly transformed over the years, into a technology company, and you try to get your customers to adopt your technology. What do you want to say about change management and adoption?
It's a weird thing to think that in some ways government agencies are moving faster than technology companies are able to catch up right now. That's a weird thing to say out loud, but that's kind of what's happening. Policy changes are coming down that are really transformational and require a ton of change management. And in some cases, you're hearing, solution providers almost cry uncle and say, no, wait, we can't do that fast. But the same situation that Jeremy was talking about earlier, where there's 13 different, disparate touch points in order to understand how to roll out that change efficiently, means that there's extra pressure and burden on companies like ourselves to not just think about ourselves, to think about the ecosystem, to think about how the entire map, if you will, of technology solutions need to work together to enable a lender to actually implement that change, adopt it, and then get value out of it as you're working with your customers. So we found that it's not just about the policy, it's not just about our own capability, but it's also about us enabling others to work seamlessly together through better API integrations, through creating technology that can actually be adopted and incorporated into other platforms. You can take the approach of trying to create just competitive advantage only and hoard things, but I don't think that serves the industry well. I don't think that serves our end customer well, the borrower, the home buyer. I think there's ways that we have to think about how we partner together, how we solve problems before lenders ask for them. And that's been a big part of our transformation and growth, is that instead of just worrying about our own business, we've also started to really think about how do we empower the entire ecosystem to be successful with some of these major policy changes, rollouts, modernization, updates, and they're not stopping. I mean, the roadmap continues, right? So it's consistently looking forward as well and almost anticipating what's going to happen next.
Yeah, certainly from the customer experience, I don't think we know what, I was talking to Josh about this, I don't think we know what we want, really. And we need people envisioning, a different way of doing things, but it's so complex because, I think of that Steve Jobs, and they wanted to simplify and build something that the customer didn't even know they needed, right? That's the classic quote. But yet they had a completely controlled ecosystem, and that's the big difference, right? Jeremy?
Chuck, I think that's a great point. It's what Matt was saying about whether or not you're changing the technology or changing the process. And to your point, I think a lot of times there's a default to the technology is going to give us a new process. Like once we get this implemented, we will have a new process as a result, rather than layering on the process you want and using the technology for what it's good at, what technology is good at. And so to Kenon's point, like, you don't want lenders competing on policy. You don't want lenders competing on credit policy in particular. You want them competing on the services, the technology partners, the way that integrations and technology are used potentially to make marketing or other types of service related, competitive changes. And I think too often, at least from a lender perspective, it's, oh good, this will give me the blueprint to my process by bringing it on, as opposed to the other way around. Here's the blueprint, make the technology do that better.
Yeah. Last on this one, Josh, I was just thinking, your primary user base are loan officers, so what success stories do you see lenders having really getting the loan officers to adopt the technology fully?
Yeah, I mean, that's always kind of the struggle. It's how do you get the end user to want to use the system, especially the CRM. I still have yet to meet salespeople that go, I want to go and start my day and use my CRM. Like, how do I do that? I mean, what we've really figured out is how do you bring and put something of value in the platform? So if you're giving someone a piece of technology to do a new task and there's no value to that new task, other than now you've done it digitally, then why would I do that, right? So new value, for example, we have a mobile application. And we think it's super powerful to do a lot of things, but what really got adoption was, hey, loan officer, you can see your rate expiration dates on your mobile app. And silly as that sounds, and now when you're out in the field and you're talking to the real estate agent, you don't need to open up your laptop and see when your rate lock expiring and who the real estate agent is. You can see it from your mobile phone. All of a sudden they said, oh, that's really helpful. I don't have to, because I check that all the time and I'm trying to see what's going on. Now there's something to value. Now hopefully, once you go in there, you'll notice the CRM and your alerts and your text messages and all these other wonderful things, and you'll use them. But if not, at least go in there and take care of that action. Give them something of value to, and a reason to use it.
I think that's a great point, because when I think so, when I was talking to an innovator at Samsung outside of our industry, when Internet of Things was a big trend, I think it still is a big trend, but when it was the hot trend that everybody wanted to talk about, and she ran innovation at Samsung, and her comment was, "We're competing with the light switch. If it's not easier than a light switch, we're going to lose. They're not going to adopt it because we got to compete with the light switch." I'm thinking of it in the context of the e-closing space, which again, like at this conference and others over the last couple of years, it's like digital closings, fully digital, RON, remote closings, that type of thing. You're competing with paper. It has to be easier. It has to be easier than paper. And so to your point about whether it's loan officers, underwriters, other business partners, companies you're trying to get to adopt, it has to be easier than the status quo. It has to be more natural than the status quo, or it isn't going to succeed. So I always think of the light switch as it has to be easier than that.
Yeah. And I think the stats on e-closing have went backwards, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't that
Funny how COVID forced people to do things remotely.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit to another topic, because I think we've been talking a lot about kind of a process perspective, and maybe this will influence process. But data is we have more access, easier to data today, I think. Kenon, how do you see that being used, and hopefully, how do you see it being used in the future to really make better customer journeys, processes, efficiencies, effectiveness?
Yeah, I think we're doing a better job of harnessing data, but it started with the long journey of just, first of all, getting it aggregated and cleaned. From our perspective, really focused on the property itself, and we've spent almost a decade really building out individual data sources, individual connections with market data, with MLS, with public records in a way where it could actually be utilized. We have a statement, internal statement that says make data actionable, right? So it's great to get it all together, but it has to be actionable. So it's taken a number of years to just get all of the data together in a way that you could start to then feed models, feed exception-based processes to make that data actionable. One of the areas that has been, we've seen a lot of trends focusing on the underwriting process and making underwriting more efficient. And so what that means is actually taking data, instead of it being in different documents and checklists and Google searches, but actually bringing all that together in an aggregated way, and then allowing that to be implemented where it's actually exception-based and exception management. But I think to your point about the future, I think the opportunity is to not just use that data on the back end of the process. Wait till you're actually submitting something to the GSEs, to the automated underwriting systems, or using it after you have all your files in, but bringing that data earlier in the process. Bringing the same things that you already know about at the end. As soon as you know about one of those things, what's the property type, what are my eligibility requirements, bring that right to point of sale in a way that can, first of all, enhance the borrower's experience. Setting the right expectations up front, but then also getting some steps done, if you will, before it gets all the way to the back end. It's just like with any QA process. The more you build QA earlier into the process, the more efficient you are later on.
Kenon, I think you touched on like a really difficult challenge though, around especially moving data up into different timing or even locations in how it's collected and how it's used, because from the outside looking in, I would suggest everybody, consumers and business partners, view real estate, title, and mortgage as one industry. It's a process that they from the outside see as one thing. Internally, we don't typically talk about it that way. I think a lot of people talk about the real estate industry, the title industry, the mortgage industry, and yet what you just said is like, if true innovation is going to happen holistically, that can't be true going forward. We have to treat it, using Matt's perspective earlier, the way the customer expects to experience it. They expect to experience this one thing. And I still don't think, I think we talk a lot about the all-in-one platforms. I still don't think we're anywhere near understanding it the way the customer wants to understand one thing.
And let me jump in real quick. We've been doing a lot of work in our company in the data governance space, but also in the servicing transfer business. And so what a pile of garbage you get to when you get down the road through, 50 payments and delinquencies and defaults. And it just magnifies Kenon's point. I mean, if the idea was at the very beginning to say, okay, that's the borrower, this is their income, this is all of that information, and you run it through the process saying that's the gold copy at application or what have you, and you track it along the way, it's there. And so shipping isn't hard, setting up servicing isn't difficult, and so forth, but it carries on and on and on and on. And yet at the same time, nobody really owns the data in the mortgage process. Someone owns the process at the beginning, and then as it moves out of their area, they don't own it any longer, even though they were in charge when it became the authoritative data or document or what have you. And I think the industry is starting to talk a lot more about things like, well, why couldn't all of the GSE's U files be put somewhere and be available downstream and so forth. Innovative concepts like, why are we moving the data everywhere instead of finding a place to put it? I'm sure MERS would like that idea, but regardless, I think it's a very interesting point, and there's an enormous amount of money to be saved. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on just looking at an MSR trade to figure out if you should bid on it. And, just an example, I think going backwards to production, there's certainly efficiencies to be gained. And I don't know that those are that difficult if someone were just to assist and give some guidance on how best practice might work in that data management space.
Yeah, I mean, I think lenders are just starting to get their arms around retaining and having, data that's all in a single source, let alone being able to share it, or the industry having it shared and going up and downstream, and we'll get to some of those. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and Kenon, you said it, was data needs to be actionable, right? So so you need to prepare it in a way that there's enough information that there's something that can take an action on. The second thing is lenders need to take action. I think that's something that we see a lot of misses in the industry is with these disparate systems, you don't have decision engines that can actually take action through several systems, right? Let's say something comes up, you may need to interact with the servicing platform, and then with the LOS, and then with the CRM, and then create an action because of some buy sign or trigger. And most systems don't have the ability to do that. So I think lenders need to start thinking about it. There's a lot of great data out there. I mean, we have a data product where people buy it from us and it enriches the files it comes in, and they can get all these points of data, and they can do all kinds of great things with it. But unless you create rules or make action or create marketing or do something with the data, it's just data sitting in a database not doing anything for you. So take action with it, I think, is a big thing right now.
Yeah. Do you guys see a lot of movement with predictive data?
Yes. Yeah, it's what I always say, it's tougher now in the industry when you have something like rates go from 2.5% to 6 or 7%. It's hard to kind of give the predictions and say what worked and what didn't work because there's so much other market drivers there. But there definitely is something that's starting to take place in the industry.
My only cautionary tale on using a lot of predictive analytics in relation to borrowers is just to make sure that the human bias that went into the data that's being used in order to do the predictions doesn't have that bias. And it's easy to think about things like redlining or what have you, but that's really the trick. And I think we'll find that dilemma is going to be a common thread in conversations about this AI too.
I think you said it's AI that's going to do it. So the thing about AI is there's no bias, except for you probably do need to tell it, don't look at these several factors because you don't want to redline.
Right,
but other than that, it looks at every attribute and comes up with its own
absolutely,
theory, which is the power.
But somebody that forgets to tell them, don't look at these attributes or whatever it is, and now you're down a road, and much like predictive models in general, companies that are big enough and have enough of them have an entire group of people that just their whole job is model governance. And when the models start taking off and going over here, and nobody's paying attention to retrain the models to get them back on track, there can be, situations for sure that are definitely harmful. I know CFPB cares a lot about this topic.
Well, there's never been a time, more so than this, where data governance is key, where really understanding the data that you're using in a controlled way, and then testing the crap out of it when and your outputs, for whatever models that you're using. The importance of data, having the right data, but also the importance of really having a strong testing approach to whatever models and automation you're using. That's just, the necessity of that is increasing greatly. With the same speed that AI is coming into play is the same speed at which we need to have really robust testing to ensure that we don't have biased outcomes, and to ensure that we're getting the impact in a fair way. But that hasn't really changed. We've always had that need. It's just now the discipline needs to be around that needs to increase at the same speed that the innovation and technology is coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about AI, I think for the most part, it's just access to vast amounts of data very quickly, which in some ways excites me just on an everyday basis for many reasons, but certainly in the business. But it's the inferences that can come from that. Is that right, Jeremy? I mean,
Yeah, the way I was thinking about it, Kenon, is what changed, to Chuck's point, what changed was the amount of data that you can now use or that you have to do some back testing. So not live testing on consumers, but we actually are collecting more, at least in the process, than ever before. So I don't even think you could have done cash flow analysis on loans beyond a certain date because we weren't even collecting the data necessary to put it with the credit data to make that determination. And now, thanks to tools, data aggregators that have claimed the consumer's banking data on behalf of them to be used for other applications like lending, now we actually have sources to put with the old data to then start to look at it. You couldn't even do back testing on certain types of things before that.
And then the other thing is now we have unbelievable power and speed and capacity to look at unstructured data. So documents, forms, whatever it is. And so it's incredibly, the amount of computing power is so high now that we can do just so much more than even like 5 years ago.
Well, it seems with all that, there's a lot of opportunity, and it almost goes to the AI argument at its most fundamental. There's so much opportunity, and then there's so much potential harm, in any topic you talk to. But it's fascinating to think of. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this process, because I think, Jeremy, you talked a little bit about the consumer thinks it's just kind of one transaction, but it's just like from start to finish, we've got this complex process where we gather data and we validate it. And we take it in, and then maybe we transfer it to an investor who does the exact same thing, and then it goes down the chain all this way, right? And so it's so inefficient, and I think, just having seen some lectures on blockchain, people just pull their hair out because there's so much inefficiencies in our system. And I know you've done evaluations on blockchain technology and really looked at it. So what's the progress on that? That was the big hot thing, right?
Yeah, I think the funny part is I think the AI community wasn't quite ready for their models like OpenAI. So they said, for 3 years, everyone look over here at blockchain. That became the hot topic that everyone wanted to talk about. And now that their AI models are better, they're like, forget that. AI is the thing you want. AI is the thing you need to be talking about. But in reality, I think what happened was the conversation we were just having. I bet a lot of people went, well, you're describing blockchain. That's what you're describing, a single source data that is verified and carries through. And instead of looking at it universally or trying to think of it as the cure-all or the save-all, the way you're hearing people talk about AI that way today, what happened is I think a lot of it, entrepreneurs and innovators and companies pulled back and said, all right, let's deploy it in a very specific way to see if we can get some infrastructure or speed or efficiency just here or right here. And so in our industry, that really took the form, I think, in more of that due diligence secondary market perspective. So when you have data at closing, let's say, or right there at the moment it needs to be in its cleanest legal form, how do you then capture it so that it can be kind of sped through that expensive, redundant process Matt was talking about, both for securitization but also for servicing? So I think we see some examples of folks trying to attempt that. I think that's the best practical example we've seen since last year this time, let's say. I think the other two ways that have been really interesting on the emerging side have been, to Kenon's point about pulling things up front. And the two big areas there are the consumer and the collateral. And so how do you bring data up and gather it and use it in a way up front that then that consumer is locked in and they can use that verified data however they want. We have folks sitting right up here working on that. And then same thing with the collateral. You hear about, I think, a lot of interest in let's get a few more data points. Data points we're gonna need anyway, but let's get them up front when the house is gonna transact, lock them in there. The problem still tends to be the practical problem. Who can consume that? Who's going to be able to use it and look at? So Josh's point from earlier, I think, still comes back to be one of the challenges and obstacles to blockchain, which is it is most effective when everybody uses it, but we're in a system where there's still legacy fragmentation that makes it very difficult to really capitalize on front-loading the data, say, at listing, or front-loading the data at the consumer profile. So there's good work going on there from a blockchain perspective. There's good work going on in the securitization transfer space from a blockchain perspective, but connecting all that is very, very complicated and still is going to take a lot of time. So it's happening. It's just really, really targeted right now.
Well, one thing I like about this time that we're in, as difficult as it is to manage the volatility of the market, is that it's forcing all of us to get super smart and super focused about where we're going to invest our time, because it has to produce value along the way. This is not a time where you jump into something speculative that you might see value from 3 years from now. This is a time that every effort that you take needs to produce some value as it's going towards, a larger goal. One of my team members this morning said, I'm just trying to take the right steps every day towards the direction that I want to go. And I can't get there overnight, but I'm just trying to take one more step today that takes me towards that goal. And when it comes to things like digitizing properties up front during the listing process, is that can't just be done for something that we hope will create value downstream at some point when someone creates some great idea at the back end of the process. It has to create value right then and there for the person that has to do the work to digitize that property or to scan it. It has to create value in the experience of the real estate transaction, or marketing value for the listing, or reduce some of the burden for the home inspector, right? That's how we get adoption, is by creating tools that help the people that are using it, not just people that we want to do something for us and hope that at some point it pays off. And this time of volatility, I think, helps us think more like that and think about adding value to people's lives as we ask them to do each task along the way.
Yeah, Josh?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you really have to think about, to that point, added value. Why would I do this? Why would I use this? So I kind of give a quick side note, it's like the electric car and gas car debate. People say, no one's ever going to, it's always going to have gas cars. I say, wait a minute. Wait till you can charge your car and you can go 3,000 miles on one charge. Then tell me you're going to have a gas car, you're going to stop at the gas station once a week. You're going to have an electric car, because it's just to be too damn convenient.
And they'll have hydrogen cars anyway, so.
Well, whatever, but that's going to, it's not going to be the desire, it's going to be the necessity of how much easier it is to use it.
Exactly.
And that's going to make the change.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a really good example too, because GM made a promise to go fully EV by 2035. I may have that year wrong. But to Josh's point, that wouldn't have happened unless someone came in and actually put pressure on the incumbents, put pressure on the legacy infrastructure, not just from the threat, the sort of bigger threat of fossil fuels, but literally with a competing product in the market that forced that promise to happen.
Change consumer demand.
That's right. And so I think it's a really good parallel for how we should think about it.
Okay, well, we've got a couple minutes left. You guys, so I'd like to maybe suggest a topic for a final comment. When we're back here sitting in this exact spot 3 years from now, which isn't that far along, what do you think the biggest change will be in the process? Will it be the same conversation, just enhanced a little? Since this is a curveball,
I guess I'll go
you can
first.
go first.
I think the conversation is going to be cost to produce and what's actually taking place in the back office, right? And I don't think, and hopefully in 3 years from now, it's going to go from 5 people looking at a W-2 to close a loan to maybe 1 person. Let's hope, right? I think those are going to be the changes because that's what our industry has to do is change those back office costs right now.
What would drive that?
I mean, it's automation, it's AI, machine learning, it's better integrations, having platforms from the very beginning, from the source data, from the first time they talk to that customer to when you fund the loan, having, it synchronized through.
Kenon, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, certainly on the collateral side of things in the appraisal world, I mean, what things are going to look like 3 years from now, that change has already started happening, right now. The idea that in 3 years from now, really you're almost expecting there to be a faster upfront understanding of the value and whether or not that value is accepted or whether you need to go out and get another opinion of value. Like that shift hasn't really happened yet in our mindsets. There's some sort of early adopters of this idea of no, I need value certainty right up front, and then I'll only go to other options if that's an exception. That I think is what's gonna flip, and it's hard. Like you talked about LOs and that type of change management is going to be a process, but I really think that we're going to be looking at a complete change of what we consider to be the default process, 3 years from now.
Wow.
So you quote me on that.
I'll jump in. It's similar. I actually think in the next, it may not be a year, it'll be in the 3 to 5. People are already starting to become very restless about the technology choices that are on the market. And I really do believe that some companies are going to come up with some better mousetraps. And so, I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's blockchain. I don't know if it's low code combined with things you can plug into it. I am certain that it'll involve better use of data throughout, but I do think that the market participants are restless. They're looking for something else, and the major players that produce the most technology aren't providing it, and they're sticking firm on price, and it's just going to be in trying to raise price. I think it's going to be a tough play, and I think that somebody's going to come in from the side out of nowhere with something really different.
I think this is a little bit of a combination, a couple of the trends we're talking about, but whether you think about it as proactive kind of data starters or proactive data, kind of the way Matt was talking about earlier, the ecosystem is going to serve up data that you can actually start an application or start the process with much more of it already in place. And I think the result of that 3 years from now is going to be that where the consumer's trust already lives is going to be able to do a transaction or do an offer because they already have this idea of proactive, perpetual relationship. If you ask the consumer, would you like to be in a program where you say yes once a quarter and you just get proactive credit offers that apply to you and are customized? I think almost every customer would be like, yeah, sounds great. I'll say yes to that. I'll consent to that. And so I think that ability to move data in a way where it's already somewhere the consumer trusts and then just use it proactively to say, you're ready, here you go. Here's what we can offer you today. Click the green button. I mean, I think it's probably a little bit more of a, maybe, yeah, like you were saying that 3 years out, but that kind of like, you already have the consumer's trust, you get their data, and you just make them the offer. I think that will actually move the underwriting piece a lot farther along.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking, you know, a better consumer experience potentially. And certainly from the lender perspective, you know, as a lender, you know, with the legacy technologies and the stacks of technologies that you have, some involvement there in some fashion would be very welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, what a great panel, huh? Thank you guys so much very much.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.